The Omniologists Collective is a public forum group aimed at curating communication, perspectives, and progress. Recorded at our studio in Montclair, New Jersey, we're focused on bringing the local community together to discuss topics that are important to us. You can access our group and live streams through Facebook at facebook.com/groups/Omniologists Collective.
I'm here today with my friends.
Hi, I'm Hassan.
Hassan. Yeah, introduce yourself.
Yeah, what do you do? I don't know. I'm really into sociology and economics. I'm a socialist. That's basically most of what I'm interested in. I'm Egyptian, and I'm really interested in Middle Eastern and Global South politics recently.
Oh, cool.
And, yeah.
Awesome. And I'm Mare. I'm an artist. I live very locally. I love discussing things that needs to be discussed. I'm here to, that's how things get done and things get discovered and agreed upon. So it's exciting for me.
Awesome.
Okay.
No, you go. Well, I'm Barbara, and I'm currently almost done at school, but I will be becoming an art teacher very soon. And I also like discussing things, and to be honest, I think that last year I was just really stoned one night and I was thinking some things and I was like, I wonder if other people think things, and here we are now. So thank you for joining me.
You're correct. They also get stoned and think things.
Yeah,
Definitely.
I'm like, am I just crazy? But yeah, thank you for...
Yeah.
And I'm Chris. This is my studio where I experiment with recording bands, promoting smaller and bigger musicians, and just trying to pursue my interest in audio as much as humanly possible. And in that pursuit, I realized that the visual also plays a large part in the audio. So you can't see it here, but on the other side of the camera, there's also a screen printing design lab sort of that I use for that same aspect. So this is just another offshoot of supporting people who want to do real shit. And here you are. So.
Thank you.
And we have one more guest coming, right?
Yes.
At some point.
Yes.
I guess they'll introduce themselves and they leave.
Of course.
Yeah.
Take it away.
All right. So I made some talking points, but I'm sure we're just going to end up talking about whatever the heck we want to talk about. So on this board, I don't know if you guys can read or if it's me backwards, but I figured net neutrality is a thing because everyone's talking about that lately, and that's kind of important. So I've been thinking a lot about higher education lately, mostly because I'm finishing school and realizing, was that all worth it? And I know a lot of people probably feel that way too, or not, I don't know. Music politics and the DIY scene. I just feel like that's something that is either depleting or it's not so, I don't know, it's interesting seeing the changes, especially in our area. Because I know at one point it was a huge, big thing.
Yeah.
And then something happened. So I don't know, maybe we could start with that. There's one more thing, but I feel like that's, I don't know.
It
so
lends
it's
itself to the rest. I think.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Especially in the setting that we're in.
And I
We'll
have
get
this,
everything organically.
I
Yeah,
have this
exactly.
tablet here if anyone needs to research something or look it up.
Or wants to show us a video or
Yeah,
or anything.
or an image. So
So I also have stuff posted to the group if anybody feels like they have anything else they want to pull from that. Because I just post things randomly. But
Nice. Yes.
yeah. So,
you want to start with net neutrality?
okay. What are some opinions on that?
To be honest with you, I don't know a lot about it, but when I do sit down and try to read about it, I'm just really, as with everything, just really upset and concerned. And I'm like, I don't really know how much of a voice I have against this, against people who are trying to, destroy the freedom we have on the internet. I'm not really so educated on it, which I feel like is everyone's problem, which, so I feel like I'm part of a larger group of people who are don't really know how it entails and what they can do to change it, but clearly I love the internet. The internet's the best. It's the worst, but it's also the best, and I feel like it's, the last frontier of real freedom. So I'm concerned about it.
Yeah.
I feel it's obviously to be concerned about it, but how I just would, to know enough about it, I can, tell my parents about it, and have them understand, because I feel like teaching my parents thing is a really big deal. Not everyone's parents are open to everything, and I feel like maybe they could tell their friends something about it and spread it along. You
See,
know?
I think the other thing though is like our generation, at least, I think that most of our like reality is based on the internet because of what we do. So I like even you saying like telling your parents about it. I feel like even my parents don't have as much involvement with the internet as much as like we do, especially like you because you use it like for your job.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. Like, you know, I've been trying to, you know, the internet is like basically my portfolio is on the internet. You know, if things like that, people can't access that, that directly affects me negatively, you know, amongst other much larger, more important things, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think net neutrality is really interesting because, like, it's obvious that, like, economically, the internet is really different than a lot of other, like, technological advancements. And especially in just how it like gives you access to so much content for free. Like you can sit in your house and like watch shit for like hundreds of hours and not pay $1. And that's like a very new paradigm. Like that's not a thing that kind of is supposed to exist. So like getting rid of net neutrality is kind of trying to like extract more profit out of that, so that people don't do that. Because overwhelmingly, that's most of what people do nowadays. Because that's the only thing you can do like on the cheap. And I think it's some way of just trying to push that out, like just increasing the cost of any sort of entertainment in general. So that's really worrying.
Yeah.
What do you think, Barbara?
What do I think?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I definitely agree with Mare being, like, I'm also an artist, and a lot of my stuff is based on that. I mean, even this group, let alone, like, being able to just find
On
people.
the internet.
Yeah, so, but I think that, then again, I do feel with the current, like, political whatever's going on, a lot, it's so hard to see what's being done simply to rile people up, and then what's also being done seriously. So I feel like I won't know what's really going to happen until something happens, but that's usually the case with it. You know, things, people complain about them and talk about them, but then when it actually happens, then that's when it goes down. But we kind of foster all the stuff around it until then.
Yeah.
And I think they kind of ride on that. Like, how do people feel about this? Oh, they're really upset. Let's really push their buttons type. But then again, I sound like I'm being conspiracy theorist. So
I really feel like, but I agree with you. I feel like a lot of things are like, look over here, this is really upsetting, and something else equally, if not more upsetting, is happening in the meantime over here. And like everyone's distracted with one thing. I feel a lot of it's, you know, there's a lot of manipulation of people. You can be anyone on the internet, and you can say anything and pass it off as, like, you know, as truth and reality. So I feel like there's a lot of shit to like sift through. You know, a lot of misinformation.
Yeah, my biggest issue is.
Okay, just
they
making
will
sure.
pop up.
All right, thank you.
If anyone is watching and would like to leave comments for us to talk about, please do.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, I guess my big concern is, you know, you're talking about we're having like hours of watching or absorbing content. And to me, it's always been like, you know, what is value in content? You know, and one thing that you determine through sifting through content is its value. And the freedom to have access to all that content is what we really have right now. Where in the future, if there is no net neutrality, people will be deciding which content we can and cannot read with a paywall, which I think is like really the scary part. You know, because all of a sudden the endlessly free content becomes completely controlled.
So that's like a matter of privilege in the end, kind of.
Right, it's another paywall. Right.
Yeah.
Whereas the internet was something for, I think, the disenfranchised to finally even themselves out in the playing field. And I think you see that a lot today, especially on Facebook, with people who have, let's say, who maybe were not taken as seriously because of social issues they experienced, mental illnesses they might have, being introverted, whatever. And the internet gave them the ability to have the power to learn and speak out and create an identity.
Absolutely, yes.
Right? Whereas now that may not be the case, and it's going to go back to, maybe, right, if and when it happens. It runs the risk of it being sort of more old school and more shallow, you know, where maybe we're going to remove ourselves from the internet more because less people want to pay for it, or maybe they will pay into it. But either way, maybe more people will spend time in physical reality. But only to have noticed that while we were all distracted by the internet, everything that was valuable around us is either gone or deteriorated for whatever reason. So I don't know. Those are the sort of things that I think about when I think about net neutrality.
That's an interesting point.
Mhm.
I feel like a lot of because I know everyone puts such emphasis on jobs, like working, like coding or website building or things of this nature, and like people like practical jobs like building things or fixing things are like kind of going to the wayside. Like it's not as glamorous or encouraged, to like work in construction or like be a mechanic, because everyone does drive a car. I know like the internet exists and it's wonderful and it's great, but like you can't code a car, like you have to you have to be able to fix things physically. Like I did go to school originally to college for like fashion design, and while that is in itself a whole business and a whole superficial thing in itself, I do know how to make clothes now, which is something I feel like a lost art to it. Like people don't know how to sew on a button or like how to cook anything, and I feel like these things are like really important. Like these like and people who are older than us are like, oh, you young people don't know how to do anything. You can do all this fancy stuff in your technology or your computer and stuff like that, but like you don't know how to cook or clean anything or fix anything. And like I feel like there's a big reemergence of this interest in like DIY stuff and like building things or fixing things and that like that. And I feel like maybe like you said that people will be turned off by this if this does happen and it's a big money wall, as you say. People are going to be turned off by it. Like I'm going to read a book. I'm going to make something with my hands because this is bullshit, Yeah,
it makes me think about, two things. One, literacy, where I've been thinking about literacy lately in terms of, you know how to read, but do you really deeply understand your content? I think everyone, or most people, because of access to the internet, know how to read. But do they really have literacy, which is to really deeply understand what they are reading, And I think that sort of applies to what you're saying in a more with your skills. Like just because you can look up a recipe and like cook a really nice meal, does that really mean you know how to cook? It's like maybe not.
But see, in terms of that, I think though the internet. So as much as you're like, oh, you can read on the internet, but is it the same as being able to understand what it means? If you take the amount of opinions that come along with the internet and what you read, I feel like a narrative is already predisposed on what you're reading, as opposed to just being in the real world and like picking up a book and then reading it. It's just you and the author and what you know of the author, not all this extra, And
wow,
then,
that's a great point.
And then, because I was thinking about this last night actually. I know this sounds like kind of stupid, but just the new function of the reacts on Facebook.
Yeah.
From being to just liking something, and then if you don't like it, it's not going to show, to like being mad, angry, sad, whatever about it. I think people take that and they immediately, like, for instance, if you read something with all these extra things added onto it, say maybe you have an opinion about it, people will judge you based on your opinion, which wouldn't happen if you read a book and figured that out for yourself, So I think that's something that once we go back into the real world post net neutrality, how will we function as a society with that?
Well, one thing I think about is that one of the positive aspects for me as someone, I consider myself more an anarchist thinker, and I think the most important government is self-government, right? So one thing that sort of appeals to me, in like the unfortunate event of...
I'm sorry, the next guest is here.
No problem, and I'm actually going to share this to a larger audience, if that's all right.
Excellent.
But continue your point.
One thing that kind of appeals to me about the oncoming unfortunate event of net neutrality is the ability to create your own internet networks. Whereas like now we tap into a phone line to connect into everyone's network. That is everyone, right?
Yeah.
But potentially, you will have smaller infrastructures of networking with smaller groups, which is sort of individual empowerment, But then...
is it more just divisive?
Yes, and that's like the issue. That's like the sort of strange beauty of the internet is that we're all interconnected on it. Whereas the tool of the internet itself in the future may end up being more like smaller, divided groups. So I think that's interesting. I'd like to think that I, would be able to have a small network that other people would want to be a part of and connect to. And then that sort of takes away from the actual beauty of the internet, which is the open access to it, which is,
So I'm clueless. What are things like in Egypt in terms of the internet?
Yeah, great.
So,
wow.
The internet did a lot in Egypt there's a really big tech sector in Egypt that's starting to emerge. There's like a Silicon Valley of Cairo, and that has really interesting effects on the job market because a lot of people are really interested in tech, especially because it has like jobs available outside of the country. So a lot of people will learn a lot as much as they can there, and then try to leave. And then as far as the internet in general in Egypt, like it's very slow, so that's a big part of it. But it's pretty widespread. Like I wouldn't know like how significant the like penetration rate is, but like it's a decent amount of people have it. But I don't know. It's kind of like here where there's a pretty big generational divide.
Yeah. Bring your pizza. Yeah.
Okay. Older people aren't really too interested in it, and younger people are all over it. So
that's a great point. This interesting part about like the age gap between the use of the internet, which is like we're part of it. People who are younger are also part of it and maybe better at it because they were born with it. And then there's a whole large, humongous demographic of people who are older who like sort of use it, but do they understand it as deeply as like the youth does? Like, because like everyone here is like in their 20s or below, right? Yeah, so like I consider us still somewhat the youth,
Yeah.
So yeah, and it's like I think this political run, this last election was the first time where like the older folks infiltrated the internet, for their like use. And because we're so addicted, in my view, to things like the internet, we were easily manipulated by like the mindsets that we tried to escape by using the internet. Like we tried to escape these archaic, clearly prejudiced viewpoints by using the internet, interconnecting with people, and proving that our more open-minded views are real by connecting with other people. But then now those same sort of closed-minded views were just interjected, and manipulated by the powers that be. I think, think about that a lot.
yeah, I think it was interesting to see like older people, especially in government, start to take the internet as like a serious force.
Right.
Because for a long time it was just kind of like seen by older people as just kind of like this like fad or toy or something. Like it's just this thing that's around. It's not a big deal, but it's an enormous deal. Like it has like effects on every single sector of the economy and every part of the world. And the fact that they're kind of just starting to realize that in politics in 2017 is really indicative of how slow the political cycle is to catch up with this kind of stuff. Like there's that ridiculous quote from Trump where he's talking about how like they need to get better with cyber, and it's like yeah, that's the problem. You're not good enough at cyber. But yeah, no, I just always thought that was really interesting, especially because I contrast it with China, who essentially have their own internet set up. They have like all different kind of like specific Chinese websites set up, and they have a lot of parts of their government and of their economy integrated with the internet. Whereas here we're just like cyber, like
yeah,
it's two like separate sectors almost, where it's like the government like feels a certain way about a certain innovation, and everyone else is like way ahead of them.
To me, a lot of that comes down to like the political narrative of the place. Like here, the narrative of America is hard work and like blah blah blah, whereas sort of I would argue in more Eastern cultures, technology is what has allowed them to sort of continue being part of the global narrative, right? So like China's known for its intense industry, and of course they're going to be so deeply connected with technology in that case.
Yeah, I think that's interesting too because like America and American government especially is only really going to be interested in something as soon as it becomes profitable to be interested in it, and that's going to be much later than when it becomes obvious that it's going to be useful.
Yeah.
Like if you look at a lot of the like Silicon Valley startups and like tech startups in general, they people always talk about them being ahead of the curve. they kind of weren't, like they just happened to have resources available at the same time everyone was getting used to it. But it's obvious to them that this was a thing that will have a lot of value, so they just got in as soon as possible. And the same thing kind of happened in China. The Chinese Communist Party has a lot of researchers available to them. They have a lot of people specifically looking into how to use technological developments and stuff, and they've been doing that for decades. So as soon as the internet started to emerge, they didn't just adopt it kind of blindly. They researched on it and then tried to integrate it in a very cohesive way. And then once they did, it worked really well.
Yeah, once they did, phones. So let's introduce our new guest. You want to look at that and
Say a little bit about yourself, maybe what you do, where you're from. I don't know.
My name is Adrian. I'm a New Jersey native. I'm a singer right now. I have a layman's understanding of the social economic sort of stuff that's going on. But I think it is worth noting that Facebook, specifically, has become kind of like a pay-to-play sort of environment.
Wow.
If you have a page, forget about a personal profile. If you have a page and you're trying to get some views on a post, just letting it organically happen won't do anything anymore. You need to put money into it for people to even see it. And forget about paid likes. You can give Facebook $200 and they'll get you all these fake accounts to like your thing. They're not real people.
They do with Instagram.
Yeah.
It's a whole.
Is Instagram that way
It's a
now
pay.
too?
It's pay to play, and I think it's worth noting.
I've had that experience. Well, one because I'm also involved in music or whatever, and my MO, because I was so inspired by punk music as a kid, has always been organic growth.
Yeah.
And then I got involved with kids who really wanted to succeed in music, and they were paying to get unorganic growth all the time. And when I worked with them, I definitely attained more social capital, but I didn't even know half the people who were looking at what I was doing, so I almost didn't care. It didn't feel as good to me, when I knew the 30 people coming to my shows that only had 30 people, but I knew them, they were way better than when I was having shows where more people came, and then I have no idea who you are.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a question of what is your game plan? If you're paying money to get this social, this equity,
Yeah.
Same thing with Instagram, because I don't have a lot of experience with promotion on Facebook, but I do with Instagram, and everyone pays for it. I feel I come across so many accounts that have such a huge following. It looks and then you look at their like count, and it's very low. And I know it's it sounds really petty, but it really does matter. People are looking for that kind of thing. It does. Unfortunately, it does matter, and
especially because especially the way Facebook and Instagram are, the algorithms, are maintained at this point, the stuff that's popular is going to the top.
Yeah. And I'm not gonna lie, there was a time where my friend was oh, there's this, because she's a designer, she's trying to get her Instagram very popular, and she's there's an app I'm using, or some kind of little account, and it was very cheap, and I tried it, and it got me a lot of likes, and apparently there were a lot of accounts were following me that were actual people, but it got shut down. And I was, because it was probably the best account for this type of thing that I've seen. Everything else, you pay for a certain amount of likes on certain photos, and it's only so many. So I was looking into it because I was curious, and I was also convinced that or I couldn't get people like me organically. I've given up on that since then. And really, if you just keep doing it and you just keep connecting with people in real life who have Instagrams, who have friends who also have Instagrams, it does help a lot. And I would imagine Facebook's a different kind of beast to me.
Similar principle.
I would imagine the same thing, but but now I have a business account now, and you can pay for advertisements, which gets you, you hone exactly what audience you're trying to appeal to. It is a whole business thing, and when I first went on Instagram, this was not the case. It was it's for art, but it's always all for business, especially the way they try to, censor everything that they don't like. Whoever owns Instagram is a huge fucking prude, apparently.
I'm assuming Instagram is an American company or a Western company.
I'm not entirely sure.
Let's look it up. While we talk. You guys talk about this.
But yeah, that is a great point. And you actually sort of made that point earlier, where as soon as it becomes useful, it becomes monetized.
Oh yeah.
And that is the definition of again, I'm more of an anarchist thinker that's inspired by punk music or whatever. That's selling out, and it's a sort of a selling out mentality, which makes sense. on a certain level. But also, what I think it does is it removes the power that art gives to the poor or the underprivileged.
I agree with you.
The people who end up making art.
It's American, by the way.
Okay, yep. There you go. Instagram is American.
That makes sense.
Yeah, exactly.
It all checks out.
Same.
The people
Never
who
know.
we have learned about in history who became, who were, somewhat recognized, were recognized by the privileged, but were often poor. And it was probably because their skill was so immense that privileged people wanted to be around them.
Yeah.
Right? And then that's what allowed them to gain, stability. But now it's like...
Well, with the emergence of the internet, everyone is talented. You know what I mean?
Right.
There's so many people that, they see one thing, I could do that, so they try it, and they actually are good at it.
And there's
so,
also a lot of theft, artistic theft.
Yeah,
Right,
yeah,
right.
true.
Because you might, see the art of an underprivileged individual who doesn't have that income to promote, their product. So you think to yourself, well, I have money, I can just steal their art.
Yep.
And if they try to sue me, I could just, get a lawyer and, I pay for
Edison.
this. Yeah, exactly.
Right, Edison is an example of that, but not necessarily in art, but in the field of science.
Yeah, theft is a big part of that these days,
Right.
too. I've had many of my, illustration friends, they've claimed that other people have been stealing their designs for, clothing and stuff.
Yeah.
It's very common
I can't
practice.
tell you how many accounts I follow that are the artists really count, and their pins are replicated by Zara.
That's definitely with the
and
pins.
Yeah.
or pins or t-shirt designs, and the one that they replicate for H&M or Zara or whatever are shitty. It's a shitty knockoff when you see compared to the original, but to someone who doesn't know the original artist, it's like, oh, this is a cool idea, and it's just really, it's awful, and it's really hard to control and to manage and to protect your stuff. Truthfully, I don't know how to protect my art. I don't know if you really,
So will net neutrality benefit or worsen this problem?
Excellent question.
Because you make art too, but you're not so much someone that's you make it as a hobby, right?
Yeah.
So, because I feel like there is a difference between people that use it as a career and that still want to make art for the benefit of making art as a hobby, and music too.
There has to be a difference.
Yeah.
You have to care about certain social metrics if you're making money off of it, which is part of what makes it so weird. Because there is some equation for the conversion of likes to dollars, and that makes it strange. And the more popularity you get, the more patrons you can get on Patreon or something like that, whatever you use to monetize it. As far as net neutrality goes, I don't know how it's going to happen. It depends on how they implement it. I think it'll probably worsen it because getting larger corporate interests, especially people who have no idea how the internet works and are just rentiers like Comcast and Verizon, getting them into that situation is just going to make it terrible. They're not going to implement that kind of stuff correctly. So I think they're really going to worsen it.
I feel like with every issue that comes up in our society, I'm just trying. Maybe I'm just trying to be optimistic, but I really feel like people are really good at finding ways to go around these issues that we are faced with. I feel like they're really good at creating something new, maybe some kind of I don't know, alternate internet or something weird. Something I don't doubt that people will come together and really, if this does become a thing,
I think inevitably you're correct.
I feel like it's human nature to really overcome shit that happens.
I think it's very American to find the back door. I really think it's truly a quality of.
And not saying this is not
country.
scary and a big deal. This totally is. If it is a real threat, but I really feel like
art will find a way.
we're gonna figure it out.
Of course.
Yeah,
Art will find a
I
way.
feel that way.
We actually do have some comments. I'm not sure how to say their name.
Wow. Okay. This is I'm so sorry. Can I just call you Lex? Because I know you comment on our group.
So Lex.
Hey, Lex.
Hello.
Hi.
Lex Maru. So they said, why does our generation have so much access and resource and information, yet are less informed politically and strategically when compared to other age groups?
So
That's a good question. And then
we should discuss that.
in other words,
Yeah.
how can we have so much yet do so little as a mass? I haven't answered this,
Well, I do think that as much as we use the internet, I do believe that it is a form of sedation, physical sedation. The fact that we're using the so I'm talking about the tangible technology of it is not so much about including me in the outside world outside of making an event in a group, and you can still put you're not going to go and just sit home on your phone all day. Like nothing's pushing me to like actually go beyond sitting here on my phone, because I think people stop at the I'm so mad. That's my contribute. You know.
A good example of that sort of stuff is like, so I got home to my apartment last night, and my roommate, like, we're having a glass of wine, you know, playing some video games, whatever. He turns to me, he's like, so Adrian, did you read this article about this hotel in Japan where they serve human flesh?
Whoa.
And I'm like, no, that's not real, man. Yeah, so I went on Snopes, and I checked it was fake, obviously. But I can understand why for younger people it's harder to navigate, you know, that sort of, like, you know, that sort of ocean, you know, because, like, there's so much truth out there, yeah, and there's so much, like, accessibility, you know, but there's so much fake stuff as well.
Right.
You know, I wouldn't say, like, you know, fake news buzzword, but, like, there is a lot of articles of questionable, you know.
Yeah, this is something I mentioned prior, which is, like, literacy, right? Which is, like, going back to, like, you can read the content and you can read it, good for you, but do you really truly deeply understand it?
Yeah.
And I think that's something that is becoming more and more lost. You know, like, the ability to really deeply analyze content.
It's really lost in the older generation. Like, my parents will show me something, I'm like, guys, this is The Onion. This is a joke. Like,
Wow.
And I've had to actually explain to, like, my dad. I'm like, there are articles, like, pages that they're fake on purpose. It's a satire thing, and like people your age think it's real. And he's like, oh,
yeah, like the Borowitz report and stuff like that.
Yeah, once he got it, he was like, oh, that's funny. I'm like, yeah, once you get it, it's like funny. But if you don't get it, you're like, what? And then you just go on this huge thing, and you're like, oh, these young kids, and these people, and they're all, and they go, you know, they're really upset by things that aren't even real.
Yeah.
I feel like older people are definitely like culprits of that behavior.
For sure.
Yeah.
But like, you can't really blame them at the same time. Unfortunately, it's like they don't know any better. Truly.
Well, I think they've been manipulated so many times through politics.
Yeah.
You know, that they're just like,
they just take it, or they don't care, or they just really are tired and don't. I don't know.
Right.
Well,
there's no positive role model of knowledge in our time. You know, there is no one who is a positive role model of what is like knowledgeable or true anymore. And especially because of our political climate right now, that's dwindling even farther away from that of which may be true. You know, which bothers me.
Which is probably why your friend believed in that.
Yeah.
Because of all the bullshit that happens.
Yeah.
Why not?
Like, I'm a skeptic through and through, and like, for some, like, it kind of defies my logic for someone, you know, to even believe that's true. Like, that violates so many, like, human rights, you know, like, organizations and laws, you know, like, that would never happen.
I'm like the opposite. It's like I believe everything, but like I really am like, honestly, like it could happen. Like I really am open. So when horrible things happen, I'm like, you know what? I'm not that surprised. Like, you know, I'm not totally shocked. But, you know, I just feel like it's like a way of navigating the internet, how things are worded even, and if things like this is off. You know, this is not actually correct.
Yeah. I think we don't actually do anything because we relieve our mental neuroses of anger by typing.
Oh, yeah.
You know, or...
I feel like because we're all like so depressed. I don't know how you guys, but I'm bummed out. I like want to be really informed. Personally, I don't know how many people feel this way also, but I want to be informed about like things happening, you know, in politics and in our government. It really exhausts me. It drains me, and it makes me so depressed that I like, wow, I like need to like, you know, I withdraw. Like I don't have the strength to go out. Like, you know, anyone who goes out and rallies and like, you know, and goes out with people and like has groups and they discuss these things with other people and they make active effort to change things. I really, you know, commend them. They're amazing. I don't have that strength, like really personally. So I'm sure there are others that feel something like that. Like, you know.
Kind of off on a tangent, but like, you know, it drives me crazy when people say that artists shouldn't talk politics. When you earn a platform for yourself to perform, you can use it however you please.
Oh, you mean like,
you know, like who? Like people, like what are people to say? You know.
And what's the logic behind that? To be honest, I've never like who says that. I'm sorry.
Well,
maybe I have a lot of friends that are artists, and I don't have to hear that.
A lot of people get very mad, you know, when like a band turns
I know
political.
What
you know, like
big...
stick to the music.
Right,
you know,
right.
stop like I don't know. Like if I'm up on stage and I feel like saying something, like even if it's like perceivably good or bad, you know, I'm still
I feel like it's their job.
Yeah.
Like, you know, they're artists like Kanye West who like you're just like shut up. Like what you're saying doesn't make any sense. But then there are like, I can't think of any other example, like, I don't know, Bruce Springsteen has a huge following with people who are older than us, and like, he has lots of things to say about politics.
Yeah, he has a lot of things to say.
And I feel like that's your duty as someone in you're a leader on that scale, like, whether you like it or not, you're someone's role model. model.
people look up to you and they will listen to you.
Yeah.
I mean, you might have naysayers, and that kind of comes with the territory. But
Yeah.
I know.
I just feel you shouldn't censor art
Yeah,
in general, because
exactly.
art is one of the last things I think that we have as a society that allows us to just kind of say what we want to say. And
Influential criticism.
Yeah,
That's what it is.
the idea of the cliche is frowned upon in art because of that, because we should be having new opinions about things, and being repetitive does nothing in terms of art.
Yeah, it's like, oh, entertain us. It's like, we're not pushing boundaries. Like, we're just, we're here to make stuff and, rile stuff up.
Yeah, that's always been my biggest issue is, art is entertainment. I've tried to remove, it is entertaining, but is that what it is?
We aren't just entertainers.
Right.
It just happens to also be entertaining.
Right.
Aside from thought-provoking.
Yeah, it should be a result yielded from whatever work you're putting into it.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be the forefront.
Absolutely.
Hi, Hassan.
How
do you feel?
The only stuff I make is explicitly political, so I've never really.
Excellent.
Nice.
No, but excellent.
Yeah,
Appropriate.
No, but
what inspires you to make it explicitly political?
I don't know. I'm just trying to express things I've read and things I feel, and it has to be political because there is a correct side and an incorrect side, and if I'm trying to express the correct one, it's going to be political. So. Especially if you're talking about stuff that people have a lot of different opinions on, if you're looking at global politics, it's gonna get messy with stuff like that. But it just there's a right side and there's a wrong side. So
yeah, to me, I think that every issue has an infinite amount of nuance, and the more people who tap into it, the closer you get to
what side?
What. I don't even consider it side. I consider it closer to the truth, right? It's you have one side that is far from the truth, and you have one side that's closer to the truth, but not necessarily right, And so the more people who tune into a conversation, you get closer to what is the truth, When things are for me, when things are posited as correct or incorrect, that to me it gives me anxiety because that makes things more qualitative or quantitative than qualitative.
Yeah, and everything is situational. Everyone's perception is different. So there are so many factors that I get really overwhelmed.
See, that's the problem with the internet, though, is
Yeah.
because it generalizes it a lot. A lot of people are quick to bring up a general argument that's been spanning Facebook to cover one specific situation. You know? If someone posts something personal as a status, asking for advice, people will weigh in on this oh, let's look at this bigger thing that's been in the air lately, and let's associate to your situation. So
people are being generalized.
Yeah,
it's not their feelings. It's people.
Mm-hmm.
If you claim to hold a certain opinion, you're lumped in with hundreds of thousands of other people who might have that same opinion. Therefore, you're generalized. And I think that's really the problem at hand. It's not in effect it devalues your position, but it's really affecting the individual.
I just think it's impossible for human beings to understand the scope, the mass, how many people are on the internet. I think it's I think it's actually impossible for us to really understand how many people are seeing something or talking about something. Just like how it's hard for us to understand the magnitude of the universe itself.
Yes.
There are so many people, and when you think about how every person has their own mind and their own perception of things, and how they are a combination of their parents and their environment, it's a lot.
It happens so fast,
it's just
too.
a lot,
Yeah.
Social
and
media
it's
was
instantaneous. It's
like
so
that.
many. It's a seemingly infinite amount of people all over the internet doing weighing in on something. It's entirely overwhelming.
Wow.
And I think it's why it's hard for so many people of our generation to do stuff, because everything is so overwhelming. My mom even says so. She's like, "Why do you watch these videos?" I'm like, "Because I just have this need to learn and absorb things around me and be know what's going on." And she's like, "But it makes you upset." I'm like, "That's comes with the territory."
Yeah, it's knowledge. Knowledge makes you upset.
Yeah.
I don't
Knowledge is
know.
power. It's
but it's painful.
Yeah, whatever
Yes.
response it elicits in you, you're learning something.
Yeah.
Right.
You're being enlightened.
Exactly. It makes sense my mother doesn't want me to hurt. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
But it's going to happen. I'm an intellectual,
Yeah.
I'm destined to be hurt. And it's okay.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's so funny.
And that's the problem, I think, with that other side of the internet, is because they're afraid to be hurt. And I think they get kind of intimidated by people that take in the pain, to have a bigger perspective on things.
Yeah,
Wow.
which is more noble. I mean, that's opinion based, but
Totally.
I feel like they're like you can kind of lump them in with two groups. You know, people who aren't like they're not afraid of feeling the pain and feeling scared. That comes with learning, and others who just are always on the defensive. They're always like trying to block out the truth to live their own like naive little
Right.
kind of like the current regime and all.
I think that happens when people get older.
Yeah.
Well, actually, there's two things I want to say. One is,
I agree.
I read a statistic that you can only truly know 300 people. Like, truly connect with them. Like, your brain, that's a statistic I read, which I pretty much believe. Like, to truly deeply know someone is kind of hard and takes dedication and lots of listening and experience. And I can already thinking about deeply knowing 300 people in that way is already like, I'm already exhausted.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah.
It's a whole library in your head.
Now name them.
Yeah, right, now name them, and like, what do they like, and
Yeah,
like all this
exactly.
other stuff.
Yeah.
But the other thing I was going to say, I forget what it
Getting
was.
older, you said?
Yes, right. So this one person who I'm really upset that they're starting to think this way, but they're creative and they're pretty open-minded and pretty cool and very charismatic. But I think that they've had so many failed relationships that now they're starting to think that as you get older, you become more conservative, And to me, that just means that you stop thinking and you start protecting the things that give you power, And that's like what conservatism is to me. It's like the desire to maintain that of which is
I agree.
already there and not change things.
Tradition.
Right.
Like what has been
Tradition,
written.
Right, and I think that that's something for people when they become afraid. Fear makes people conservative when they get older because they start thinking about death or whatever.
And mortality.
Right,
comes into
mortality,
play.
all
Yeah.
this other stuff. And I think that at some point civilization was supposed to alleviate that problem from you. It's like the idea is like, oh, we have hospitals and we have schools and we have public centers for you to be around people if you feel pain, or go to the hospital if things are going wrong, or being able to travel
And
to
now
and
making
fro.
those things inaccessible.
Right, now it's exactly it's by making them less accessible through paywalls, etc. The conservatism rolls in, the fear rolls in. So
That's very true. I would be surprised if a number of my peers, became extremely conservative early on.
it's gonna happen. I see it happening, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I went in for like a routine ear cleaning like a month ago because like I thought I was having some problems and it cost me $3,000.
Wow.
Yeah, because like my ears started bleeding because of like a blockage.
Wow.
So I went there and I went to the ER, which is my mistake. I was freaking out. I was like, shit, this is my career. It's over. I got to get this fixed.
No, I would do the same thing.
So I walked right in there. They cleaned it out, like no problem. Slapped me with a bill for $3,000.
Wow.
Like who can afford
It's
this
completely
anymore?
unaffordable.
Yeah.
Like
Well, I think our generation, everyone again is like in their 20s here, right? Yeah, our generation says that thing very often. It's like, how can people afford this stuff? You know what I mean? That's crazy, and that's because our concept of jobs, I think, was either handed to you or not. Like, I think our generation is you were born with wealth, or you weren't, kind of, And then those who were born into privileged situations were able to access everything, and then those who weren't just can't.
Yeah. Old money, new money.
Right, yeah.
That's
Well,
really-
I don't think there's much new money in that's the point I'm trying to make. Like, new money is, like, not really real.
It's not real money, exactly.
Yeah.
It's credits in a bank account. Like,
Right.
It's not.
Wow.
There's no cash.
Wow.
It's pretty crazy stuff. Like I've seen a lot of it. Like I work in Hoboken, so like there's a lot of like.
So funny.
wealthy
They're
people.
walking around like, am I doing it right? Am I doing it
Yeah,
right?
am I posturing correctly?
I used to work in
Yeah.
Hoboken,
Like
so
has
I know
this
exactly
Gucci
what
belt
he's
look on
talking
me,
about.
and I'm just like, that's all fine and good. Like I love good fashion, but
Right, same.
No
like,
offense
you're-
to anyone from Hoboken who's watching.
Yeah,
no, of
No
course.
offense.
But yeah, the money is an
mostly,
issue.
Yeah, I mostly enjoy it, but there are some people, new money.
Wow.
I feel like it's I don't know anyone who's new money. I mean, I wouldn't.
That's
Yeah.
exactly my point.
That's exactly it.
No, that's exactly
Like,
what I'm
who
saying.
are they?
Yeah.
Like they're like a different breed of millennial. I don't relate to them. I don't know
Yeah.
them. I don't have
Yeah.
any friends. All my friends are broke.
Yeah.
But I also birds of a feather. Like
Yeah.
I'm not like chilling with people who are like in a have different mindset than me.
But even those who are privileged, who I've seen who end up like getting the job, the car, by the time they have a kid, they're in crisis mode because they're like, how am I going to afford their stuff?
Yeah,
like,
they're not
I can
happy.
only afford my stuff because my parents gave me all the opportunities I have. And then they're like, whoa, how am I going to feed my kid? How are they going to give all the things I have? And they're
Now
already...
they have to think of what their parents
Right, and then we're all,
Yeah.
you know, everyone's... Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, like, nepotism is rampant. You know, like, I tried my hand getting many jobs in, like, New York City and what have you, and, like, what was mostly apparent to me was it was just all about who you knew. You know, like,
It's really
whose
all-
dad knew whose dad, you know, and, like, how, you know all these people and stuff. And,
I think this is a great segue into our next topic, which is higher education.
Wow.
Which is like...
That was so organic.
Yeah, it was awesome. Which is like...
Great job, guys.
Getting into the right college is what got you the money, right? And it's either you had extreme skill and they just took you and put you in the right place for their benefit. You know, they, the ephemeral they.
Really?
You know, or you were able to pay your way into the successful market. You know, whereas, you know, the idea of academia is that your own knowledge and skill would get you there. But that's not really the case, because even when you get the diploma from the nice college, like, everyone's going to be like, yeah, but do you know how to do this? And then you'll be like...
Well, they want your experience.
Right.
That's why I went to trade school. You know,
Right.
I want to, you know, learn a trade and be able to show people I can do something. You know, as opposed to this big piece of paper I paid, you know, like $300,000 for.
It is a
It says I'm a
piece of paper
doctor.
at the end of the day. Yeah, right?
It's like, okay, you're a doctor. Can you remove my heart and put it back? Like, what are you doing? You know, like, I don't know.
How is it applicable?
Yeah,
to real
like,
life?
okay, you got a degree, but how do I know you could do what you can do? You know, it's there's that big gray area.
What do you
Yeah,
think?
I definitely think the application is the most important part of knowledge, because there's knowledge you can attain and you can, like, win Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, you know, answering some questions, but then God forbid you actually know how to apply what you're learning. I know a lot of the kids, a lot of the kids in the education program I'm in right now, you can tell are just doing it because it's like what's expected of them to be a teacher, whether it was in their family or something, but sometimes I hear the horror stories of them not being able to even, like, socially connect to the kids to get them to teach. They're like, they won't listen to me. I'm showing them all the facts and I have all this knowledge, but they just won't listen and they're failing their tests. And I'm like, well, you gotta also focus on what a teacher is or what any job is.
Like, kids
you know?
are smarter than people give them credit for. Like, they know you're a
Yes, they
person,
are.
and, like, if you're, like, just being, like, a robotic professor, like, teacher to them, they're gonna be like, what's up with this person? Like, they're not gonna connect with you. They're not gonna respect you. They respect you if you're, like, their friend, or, you know. That's how I have felt in school. Like,
Yeah, no one's gonna listen to you like if you are treating them like they're stupid.
you know, just,
You know,
I
like,
feel like just treat children like
but don't put them
people.
on a pedestal either. You know, like it's I don't know. There's definitely like a happy medium.
But I do think that a lot of professors never took a course in how to teach other people. I think because they don't need to. To become a professor, you get a master's, and then you can teach people in college. I think a lot of them are
that's
really,
really
really good at what they do. Like, when I was in SVA, I had so many teachers that were so good at, like, the art, but then they had no idea how to actually teach
No
us how to
people
do
skills.
it.
It didn't even occur to me. I just assumed that they teach you that because, like,
Yeah, right.
you have to learn
Me
how to
too. That
teach
was like
people.
my shortcoming.
Yeah, so I always
didn't
ended
do
up
my
feeling like I
research.
had to teach myself things.
Oh my god.
And I was like, I could have just done this at home and
That
not paid
explains
all this
everything.
money. So,
Yeah, really.
It does, though.
It really does.
But we all have professors like that. Like, I have. And I'm just like, you're not teaching me. Like, just look at the book. I'm like, you're not teaching me. You're just telling me I could do this by myself.
Yeah, I could
Exactly.
just go back to my dorm and read this book.
Yeah, really. If
so
it's
the
just
real
in the book.
question is it necessary?
Is higher education necessary?
It depends what you want to do.
Right,
True.
I think...
What do you think?
Yes.
Yeah, Hassan, tell us
I
your...
I went to 3 different schools for like a couple semesters each.
Excellent.
I really disliked it every time a lot. And the first time I went for IT, and I realized I could just work in the field without a degree, so I just did that. And then I went back for psych for a bit, and then that was weird. And then I went back for philosophy, and then realized if I had a degrry in philosophy, it wouldn't make any difference than if I didn't. So I just started studying that on my own. So yeah, I've always had a lot of trouble in school, like since I was really young, and I've learned a lot better on my own. So I've always been like pretty opposed to higher education. I think the like structure of it is too rigid, And just like kind of like we were saying before about like how like the political structure doesn't adapt fast enough, higher education has the same kind of problem. Like you can learn a lot of stuff much faster nowadays because of the internet, and that same thing that maybe you can learn in like a month on the internet will take like years in school. Like coding is a great example. Like you can learn coding in like an autodidactic way very quickly, but if you try to take a course on it, it's terrible. Like overwhelmingly, that's not going to help people who are like interested in that field. So I think it depends. I think a big part of it is just that it doesn't adapt fast enough, and that might have been fine for a long time. Like the kind of like lag wasn't too significant, but now with the abundance of information, it's like dead and gone almost.
Yeah, when like the bank of information is being updated every single day.
Yeah.
You know, like how can a college keep up with that?
For sure. I also went to school for philosophy. I had somewhat the opposite experience where I knew that I wanted to study philosophy because I already thought what we're talking about, which is like if I go to college to learn something, I should be doing it, you know, and when like academia was created by philosophers in the first place. Like that's its whole purpose, was to have a place to just be around people who want to discuss things. And so like so I enjoyed being around people who actually read the philosophy books or claim to, you know, whereas usually when I'm out in the regular world and I talk about philosophy, they're like, oh, here's Chris talking about philosophy again, you know, like, but even when I stepped out of academia, I also realized how much philosophy is curated to a certain lens, you know, like so much of what I was reading still came down to the Western idea of what is the utmost of philosophical thinking, not necessarily, you know, I wasn't getting, like, a lot of viewpoints that came from, you know, maybe more modern, marginalized philosophical thinkers or Eastern philosophers or whatever. It was, like, literally just, like, the richest, most bored white dudes who wrote the best books, you know, and then that's it. That was, like, the extent of it.
Inhibits your, you know, thinking. Like, you could read one thing from someone that you haven't been exposed to that completely changes your idea of something, you know, and then, like, you know, you go on to teach someone else about like this, and it changes their perception of something, and it's a chain reaction of things. So I feel like, you know, that's one thing about college. I feel like, you know, it puts you in a box, like you just said, and it just really it limits you, it limits your thinking, and I feel like you don't grow. Same thing with art. You know, they want you to be a one-trick pony, just do this thing. You're supposed to do this one thing, you know. But I'm spending, you know, thousands of dollars. I should, you know, be a little more well-rounded than this. You know, what they expect of you.
Anyone have any ideas for solutions?
Less schools would be a good start.
Wow.
I really think they should stop pressing college so heavily in high school. Like,
Yeah.
Oh, it's totally a money grab.
Yeah.
You know it at this point.
obviously.
I got funneled right into that crap. You know,
Yep.
like fresh out of high school. Like my guidance counselor is like, okay, let me type in a few things. What do you like to do? Okay, cool. You're going here. You know, it was just like that. Like here, it's like I felt like I was in Russia and I was being assigned a job. You know, like,
Wow.
I feel like
Like
anything
right in high
that's the
school.
opposite is considered a failure.
Yeah, my parents were like
You
that. They
know?
were like, you know, I only have my associates, and I have a certificate in like health coaching. I've been to like three different things. Like I went to fashion school first because you know I was like the art kid, like token art kid in my 8th grade. And they're like, oh, it makes sense, Mare, you're gonna be a big designer. I'm like, sure, I like fashion, whatever. So I went, and it was a nightmare. You know, I couldn't keep up. They gave you, you know, the schedule was out of control. Like no one there slept. And I don't drink coffee, and I'm like not a big fan of like, you know, stimulants, but I was like, I thought there was something wrong with me. I couldn't keep up. I went to a therapist, and like it really hurt my confidence. I couldn't keep up with these people. And then once I removed myself from it, I dropped out after 3 semesters. I'm like, I can't fucking do this. I was like, oh my god, that was insanity. I was in like an insane place. Like, you know, none of that's normal, and it was being normalized. Like, you know, why can't you keep up? Like, you can't finish this thing. Like, you can't keep up with this like enormous amount of work. And then I went, you know, to community college. And I went for like just a general science. And I was like, oh, okay, I have associates in this now. And that wasn't fun at all, you know? I didn't really make any friends. I just did it to do it because my mom really wanted me to. It was important to her.
Right.
And now I work at Starbucks, you know? And, like, I'm focusing on art. I want my career to be art more than anything. And I thought about going back to school, like, online because Starbucks has a good program for that. And I just can't do it, you know? I feel like, not like I wasted my time. Because, you know, you do learn through your experiences, and I learned from my experiences in college and stuff like that, but, like, really nothing I learned, aside from, like, the practicality of learning how to make clothes, I didn't learn anything that could really help me, you know, nothing at Bergen I didn't really learn that. I was like, oh, this is really going to help me in life, you know?
Yeah, I think for education was how, like, I have such negative views of the government. I'm just telling, my view is always I hate the government. So, and so, to me, huh?
I'm inclined to agree with that.
Yeah, well, that's just how I feel. And I think since FDR, no one in the government has tried to help the populace. You know, since FDR to now, it's always been, how do you manipulate the masses to give us money? And the housing market was from the 50s to the 80s or 2000s, you could argue, like having a nice house, having a nice car, etc., right? And for us, because the housing market was in the midst of crashing, education was the money grab that they advertised at us. And that's why a lot of people got super psyched when Bernie Sanders was an option. It's my view that a lot of people think that they are socialist because they don't want to pay for their college loans. Right? So the idea of free college makes them a socialist. You know, as someone who is, I'm very interested in socialist ideas. I support many of them. But in this particular political run, I think people are thinking, oh, free stuff? I definitely want that. You know? But can you blame them when, like, people are, like, I think some people are in maybe close to $100,000 in school debt. You know, like, I can't even, oh my God. Just thinking about being in $100,000 of debt for school is, like, crazy. And then you didn't get the job that they said you were going to get to pay that.
Or you change your mind, or you realize that you hate it. You know, I can tell my friends, you know, I change my mind when the wind blows, so I'm like, I'm just not going to continue with the whole school thing. Like, you know, I'm very fortunate to not have, you know, loans I have to pay off, but I'm a minority. Like, all of my friends have loans to pay off, and my heart breaks for them.
Yeah.
They pay rent, and like, oh, well, you have to pay rent, you know, so, like, you know, and on top of that, you know, I have to pay off my loans, which fluctuates every month.
Yeah.
It's awful.
Yeah.
It's like, you know.
Yeah, I just finished paying mine, and, like, it was probably one of the most anxiety-ridden things I've ever had to deal with.
You're very lucky that you're so young and you already finished them.
I mean, albeit, like, I didn't take out many. Like I was, like, fortunate enough to, like, just have some money put away, like, since I was born, like, for school.
Yeah, nice.
And I didn't go to school for very long. I dropped out of my first university and went to a trade school after that. And, like, all I had was loans from the trade school to pay. And, like, I'm really happy that burden is gone. But, like, to live, like, some people are going to be living with that, like, until they die.
I have a friend who's like, I can't die because it might.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, and then we transfer it to your loved ones. You know?
She's
It's
like,
like,
I can't
it's
do
like
that
a
to my
line of
dad.
debt.
She's like, I can't die for.
Oh
I
man,
just
it was
can't,
giving me nightmares.
You know,
I was like, how do I pay this off? Like, can I please do this now?
Yeah, it's
So I worked my ass off and I did it.
But I really can't. I don't. And people are like, oh, wait, you know, what would you do to change it? Like, get rid of it? I don't know. Like, I don't know, guys. This is really a lot.
Oh,
All right, okay. Lex has made some more comments more recently on something we were talking about.
Excellent.
He
Yes.
yes. So he commented, since FDR ? This has been the system since the start. FDR's move accelerated the race and wage gap incredibly, and he wants us to discuss Organic Act of 1871. All right, so I'm going to look that up.
Yeah, please, because I don't know.
Awesome.
Yeah, I don't
Thank you
even
for
know-
giving us a talking point.
Yes.
You're awesome.
I have no idea what that is either.
And he says socialism is as far from the answer as pure capitalism in their view. And I don't know. I think that, I mean,
But
I
I wanna hear
agree. Yeah, right. I agree, but I also think that there are things in socialist ideas that do work, especially in some of the socialist countries that exist now. But once, like for instance, these countries in the nether regions, like Sweden or whatever, they're more socialist, and it seems to work for them. But one comment that someone made for me that I thought was pretty interesting is that's because they're all a bunch of relatively wealthy white people.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's not much diversity. There's not really much economic diversity.
Yeah, I've heard
so that
also.
allows it to be successfully socialist or whatever.
Yeah, bringing that back to the education aspect of that, because that's always been like, oh, why don't we have an education system like Finland? It's so great if we could just, like, adopt that. But, like, that's the problem. It's, like, we have so many a spectrum of, like, different learners, and, like, the fact that there's, like, right now I'm in a high school in Elizabeth, and there's so many kids that, like, coming in there, I can barely even, like, talk to them because they don't understand English. but there's like not just one group of like there's so many different languages being spoken that just to get directions for my lesson across takes almost like half the week up, or I need extra supports that maybe schools don't have. So it's like of course it's going to be easier in Finland. They're all talking Finnish and they're able to speak 4 languages at the age of like 5 or something because they're all at the same level. So
That makes sense, yeah.
I think that's a problem with answering a lot of questions in general about what we should do politically, about education or anything. It's just we're so not binary in terms of like the type of people in our country or in the world, but like if we're just speaking about America, definitely America.
I feel like it was really overlooked when, you know, I know America was founded on, you know, like rape and pillaging, like
As all nations were.
yeah, essentially, but like, you know, really glossed over. But I just feel like they really, you know, it celebrated, oh, we're the great melting pot. Really looked over though in every, you know, thing we have, like for school, for jobs, like just really like, you know, oh, you know, we're so culturally diverse, but like there's that, you know, we're all, you know, one. Like no, we're not. Like you're making
That's
it hard.
why I think melting pot's like the worst term.
Yeah,
that we adopted and believed in.
Yeah, it's a big fat lie. It's like, yeah, we are, but it's like, you know, let's separate the carrots from the beans. Like it's just like it's all separated. Like, you know, it's like if you treated all of the foods differently. You know,
there must be like a better way to find unity and like look at it in terms of that.
Yeah, it's just, I feel like that's just like a big
yeah.
blanket term for something that they just like, yeah, just call this thing that sounds wonderful and then do nothing to fix it or help anybody.
I'm reading a really good book right now. I forgot the author, but it's a nonfic about higher education called Marketplace of Ideas, and he goes into the history of gen ed courses and how they were founded on this basis of like, we should have everybody being the same thing, everyone should have the same kind of values, you know, let's get the American culture going and like support it with these gen ed classes. And they would pick books, they would have book courses based around those ideals. So it makes sense to me why it's continued this tradition of like that idea, which is so...
courses are like a waste of time. Right?
Yeah.
Like they're really...
I think that they're a form of subversion, right? Which is like gen ed courses are there. I think you said this the other day, to make sure everyone is thinking the same thing about certain topics, right?
I mean, that's kind of, the
Like,
same
but-
kind of...
But specifically in general education, right? It's like because everyone has to take them, so it's like trying to force the larger groups to really think a certain amount of things about things, you know, in a realm which is less about dispute, more about organized learning and then regurgitating.
I think it's mandatory.
Yeah.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
The fact that it's like required
Nothing
and
good
if
is
you don't complete
mandatory.
it, you can't proceed. You know, like there must be something kind of mischievous at work there.
Like, you should be able to decide what you would want to learn.
Yeah, from the get-go, like, hey, I'm paying my money, you know, like,
Yeah.
God darn it, you know, I'm gonna learn what I want.
Discussion should be encouraged instead of being like, no, just read this and, you know.
Like, I took this stuff in high school, like, what's different?
Exactly. Anything about that?
It seems a little confusing to me right now, but I will tell you what what I have gathered for the most part. Seems that it. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm just like, maybe you should put a link, maybe on the.
That's a great
maybe,
idea.
like,
I am going
other
to do
people
that
can
while I'm
read it.
talking.
Or Lex, since you know about this, if you could break it down
Yeah,
into
if
a
you can
simplified
elaborate,
way
that'd be
so we
great.
could talk about it, that'd be great. Thank you.
But from what I'm taking away from this is that it made federal government sort of sectioned off into like smaller compartments for a smaller group of people to have governance over. And this happened specifically, or this is essentially when like Washington D.C. was established. So Washington D.C. was established as a place for the federal government to meet, and then there was, and then they all decided who has power over certain regions, and then everything from then on is sort of a an offshoot of that, which sort of and he brought this up in relation to the idea that I'd said that since FDR they were just trying to manipulate for power grabs, but maybe he's dating this back further, saying that by sanctioning off the larger part of the nation to a small few group of people, maybe that is truly what they were trying to do from the start, which is pretty interesting.
Interesting. I appreciate this
Yeah.
person weighing in.
Yeah, but we'll see what else they have to say.
This is how you learn, you know? Like, I would
Right.
not look this up in my own accord.
Right.
That would really bore me to death. But bringing it up, does pique my interest.
Right. Yeah, context. Knowledge has
Yeah.
more power in context, for sure. I agree with that.
You might have to pay to see posts, but not comments.
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. I think I got some more comments here.
Great. Thank you, everybody who's actually watching this.
Okay, so he claims it became openly a corporation in 1871. That's essentially what this act did, right? Because a smaller group of people who are working together to govern something.
But isn't that like the issue with almost everything that we try and establish? AKA, bring this back to the first thing we talked about with the artists on Instagram and Facebook, trying to commodify things that we just like to do as a society. Let's make art. Let's like put a show on for people. Let's have a good time together. But now we have to put a price tag on it.
So Lexus
for it to be
said
legitimate.
that he's going to try and make it to the next discussion so we can bring this back
Excellent.
up. So
Thanks.
that's going to be cool. I'm excited for that.
I will probably post something tomorrow about that, about the next date.
Yes. Thank you for your input.
Thank you.
Excellent.
All right.
But yeah, as an anarchist thinker, my number one thing is to remove yourself from the narrative. If someone tells you they have power over you, just give them the finger and just say no. Because they really don't. You're just an ant. Like, at the end of the day, you're an animal, that's pretty stupid about stuff and somewhat selfish. That's it. And then everything else is an offshoot of that. And then anyone who tries to tell you that they have some sort of power over you is just a matter of whether or not you believe that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I think individual empowerment is the most, and that's why I got into punk music as a kid, is the most important message to tell someone. It's like, if you want to attain a good life, you have to, and this is why I side with identity politics as, a thinker. Being able to form your own identity in your own image is key to resisting the larger voices that will manipulate you.
Yes.
I think
Right?
that right now that is like a very privileged thing, though. I feel like there's groups of people that can't even begin to think about that because they're
Yes.
just worried about feeding their family or,
Right.
the smallest, most, like, things that we would take for granted,
Mm-hmm.
So,
Excellent points.
Yeah, they don't have time.
which
to
is why
think
there's
about
such I feel like,
That's why, they're in a vulnerable state, due to their stature, socially, and therefore easy to prey on, or to be preyed on by people who, would claim to have power over them.
that. Right.
Because they're more preoccupied with, surviving, whereas people step in and be like, oh, well, I'll tell you how to do it.
Well, I feel like it's, I say this all the time. As someone who is privileged, it is your duty to give these, bring us up to other people who are privileged and may not think about it,
Batman.
like Batman, essentially.
Is, yeah. To me.
Yes. Vaguely Batman.
Yeah.
It is your job to give a voice to these people who are so preoccupied with just surviving, help them out, help them, raise everyone up to a level where they feel like they're at that point where they can focus on their identity and being empowered personally, because that I feel like if everyone could be personally empowered, that would really be like a dream world, because everyone's it breaks my heart when people feel like they are, under the boot of where they live or the people around them, or they just feel like they're on the outskirts. It breaks my heart, really. I'm very privileged and I'm very lucky, and I'm not proud of it, but I do know it's my duty as someone who is privileged to stand up for people who are not, against people who feel that they are or who think they can,
Totally.
bully or intimidate other people who may be less fortunate than them. Again, Batman.
No, yeah.
We all have to be Batman.
But I think
essentially.
everyone has a series of privileges that someone else doesn't have. Right?
Yes, of
Right?
course.
And I think that is something that is usually taken away from the narrative of being a privileged person, and I think that I'm someone who definitely makes criticism of people who have access to much privilege, but I even take a step back to my own views to say that the combat of you're privileged and you're privileged and you're privileged is only removing us from really tackling the people who have access to the most amount of power in the world.
Yeah.
And the more we divide ourselves, over who has more, the less time we have to come together and really.
Together.
Essentially, we all have
Occupy Wall
nothing.
Street
No, yeah.
issue.
What?
Exactly.
The issue
Yeah.
of Occupy Wall Street.
Yeah, right.
Because we didn't realize we were only focusing on ourselves as much as we were saying it's them. Because then we didn't have an actual.
I feel like it's both.
You know.
It's like policing each other,
Mm.
because we're all nothing down here, but we should police each other,
Mhm.
but also come together to overthrow who's really,
Yeah.
you know.
I don't condone policing like my peers. You know, I condone having like active discourse, you know, discussing things.
Maybe I use that term a little loosely.
Like, but no, but it's a thing. Like,
Yeah,
it
yeah.
happens like all the time. You know, people are like just calling out other people and doing all this sort of stuff. You know.
Well, I just
Leading
mean,
us to our next
Oh, are you
discussion
serious?
Yeah.
music politics and nurture culture versus empathy, which somewhat falls into
Yeah,
the call
no,
out
it's
issue.
similar.
So it does. Nice.
Yeah, not to like just dive right in, but it's been
Yeah,
irking me a little bit. Like,
Yeah.
it's great. You know, like if someone isn't known up to what they did, then definitely make it known. You know, like I'm cool with it, but I think conversation is better than just yelling incessantly at somebody,
oh, yeah.
like degrading them, making them feel like less of a human being.
Because you're not helping anybody.
No, it's not helping anything at all.
Nobody gets help.
Yeah, it's actually making things worse.
Isolating people does nothing, because then
No.
what happens afterwards? You feel so strongly about what this person's doing,
Yeah, you
and you'll
ruin
say
their life,
it,
their reputation.
but then you don't
like,
give them
what's
any
next?
solution to fix that.
And they
Yeah.
can't
Especially
be
if they're your
better.
friend, because that's so shitty to be like,
Yeah.
oh, you're doing this and that,
Yeah.
bye. But then you're like, oh, they're just going to be doing that to somebody else now.
Like, help them be better. Like, help them help
Yeah.
themselves, you know?
Yeah.
Like, don't perpetuate the abuse. You know.
Yeah.
Break the cycle.
Yeah, I definitely have lots to say about this, but I guess the number one thing to say about it right now is when I do read like these major accounts of like call out culture that, you know, are widespread and influential for a lot of people, when you really read what they did, that's most of the time it's the inevitable conclusion of their behavior, right? Like whether or not it got called out or not.
Mm-hmm.
I think the real issue is the fact that why is it being promoted right now, right? Like why is this ability or like this thing where people are like we've always been talking shit about each other openly on the internet, but why is like certain things being promoted so heavily right now through the means in which we attain social information?
I think post-election really made us feel more political in all aspects.
Nice.
Like it drove us to be that person on social media, which is fine. But then now I think it's definitely turning into a social hierarchy, or even subconsciously. Because I know a lot of people mean well, but I think they're also the people probably checking their phones saying, "Oh my God, so many people like this. I must be right." But like you, I feel like having enough passion about what you care about should be just enough for you to feel what you're doing is right, than having a whole bunch of strangers who know nothing about the situation probably.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I don't know.
I think it's like interesting to also note like there's an emphasis on like purity nowadays. You know, like being like free of bad behavior and like, you know, acting in a manner which is like, you know, better, but like, you know, like holier than thou kind of behavior. You know, like look at me, like I'm such a saint. You know,
I've
like
never done anything wrong.
exactly. Like I'm innocent. I'm an angel. You
Which
know?
is, in my opinion, usually is spoken by someone who is, I know I just said that I try not to talk like this, very privileged, right? Like where they can like just sit on their bed on their computer all day,
exactly.
you know, and like just drive to their job and then come back to their bed, you know, like every day.
Yeah.
With, you know, go ahead.
I'm sorry. It's just much more admirable if you are someone who has done something really wrong, or has wronged someone badly, and comes out and says it. You know,
comes forward.
and it's
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
and if someone's been calling you out, and like you publicly address, like, listen.
But why? So I have a friend who recently did this,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's because they were trying to hide other things they have done, right? And they were using it as a way to seem more pure. I think people do
Shut
good
it down.
things
Yeah, exactly.
for evil reasons. I was saying
That's
that
what I
to
was trying to
someone.
kind of get at a little bit. Yeah.
Right. It's like,
Well, then, like,
there's no right answer.
yeah, I know.
That is the truth. But I'm saying that it's like,
That's an interesting point, though.
yeah,
It's
they're
situational.
everything is
Yeah.
completely situational.
Yeah.
Totally.
And
Yeah.
this is
Right.
something especially we shouldn't treat as generalized, because
Right.
now we're falling into the black and white of something that now, okay, because I feel like a lot of recent things are based in the whole aspect of like sexual conduct,
For
which
now,
I
yeah.
think is such a gray area, because sexual anything is just like,
Yeah.
so situational
Yeah,
and
yeah.
like
And there's like so many degrees of it.
yeah. So what
Oh,
you're
yeah.
saying about being like pure and stuff, it's
Yeah.
like I don't know. Personally, I think that in any relationship, just like weird stuff happens in general.
Yeah.
And to be like, there's a perfect way to have a perfect relationship that will perfectly have a perfect sexually
I wanna
whatever.
read- I wanna read
It's
that
just
book,
so
yo.
interesting
Yeah.
to me, but I'm sure I don't know. So
No,
that's
it's idealistic. It's
yeah,
not,
yeah.
it's not-
so it's interesting seeing people try and navigate through the politics of social media, and it's becoming this like defined thing now, which is interesting because like I think that's something new happening in the world right now, where
I
the
agree.
consciousness is a defined way of these. Stop that. Of these very weird human things that we've never really fleshed out before. Number one, because the previous generation never wanted to even bother with
Yeah.
it.
Mhm.
And then now we're super hyper into it, and then the internet's accelerating it, so it's like, what?
Yeah.
But we're policing it, so it's getting very weird and scary. But in an interesting way, not like a bad, I don't know. I really don't know.
The realm in which it becomes
I
weird
agree.
and scary,
I'm just like,
Yeah, really.
Yeah.
I think, and this is something you know, and I talk about it all the time, and I don't mean this in any offensive manner whatsoever, because I can see how it could seem that way, but, so I participate in, like, music and art culture all the time, so I'm constantly, like, surrounded by people on, you know, either the mental illness spectrum or the autistic spectrum, and one of the main aspects of autism that I think plays into this is the ability to lack empathy. And sometimes you're going to have someone who has a very powerful thing to say about someone else on the internet, but maybe on the autistic spectrum, and you may not know it because you're just reading what they typed on the internet, right? And so, like, I think that's something that is happening a lot today, right? Whereas, like, there are certain voices. I'm not saying you should discredit people with autism or with mental illness. You should listen to them maybe more, right? Because you will probably learn a lot from them. I've definitely learned a whole ton from people like that. But it does definitely give you a context of what they're saying, right? And that's the other thing. Like, body language is removed from the context of conversation. You know,
Like facial expression.
facial
Mhm.
expression, tone, right? Exactly. Like, some people have thought I've been really mean or mad at them while talking to them, and I'm like, no, I'm literally like, I don't know, I have OCD, I talk in a certain way, I'm really sorry.
It's even gotten to the point where
Yeah.
in messages, if you put a period at the end, it can
Yeah.
be perceived as angry.
Right, exactly.
I think it
Like
really
using
depends who you're
punctuation,
talking to.
it's-
Again,
it's
it's
wild.
Right.
It is
Yeah,
situational,
yeah.
yeah.
Right.
Because I talk to my friends differently because they're all different people. You know,
Right.
like I, am consistent in like what I'm saying, but like I maybe like we can be more playful or I can be more serious. Like it depends on the people, really.
Yes.
Um,
It's my view that every person you meet, you create a new language with them. Like,
yeah.
you define words specifically between you in a certain
There's
way.
a culture, like like right now, this room has its own culture we've created in this, hour or so we've been together.
Yeah, yeah.
I feel like everybody has a different personality for each person they talk
Yeah.
to. Like,
Yeah.
you wouldn't talk to your grandmother the way you talk to me.
Yeah.
And that's
At
why I
least
call
I
it a
hope not.
language, not a personality, because your personality is the summation
Yeah.
of all the things you do.
This is
But
true.
the language itself is specific to the person you're talking to,
That makes sense.
you know?
But I think in the end, what's important is that I think in any of these situations, dialogue is necessary. And it's
Mhm.
weird because the other day, someone got mad at me for saying that, and they were like, "Oh my god, dialogue!" No. I'm like, what?
Do
Wow.
you know what that word means?
I think I
What a
was
strong
I was
point they made.
discussing some situation about an allegation or something
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that, and
Yeah.
I just provided my perspective, saying, you know what, I do think that as much as like this is reactionary and whatever, I think that communication still helps in those aspects. Like even just understanding the full situation, immediately shut down. Like no, communication
Yeah.
can be harmful. I'm like yes, but how are we gonna move if there's no
Yeah.
communication?
And that to me is someone
Or
who's
dialogue.
communicating with their emotions, not their words, right? Like
Yeah.
clearly that person is very hurt by the situation.
Maybe we need to put more situations as role models for good communicative behavior, because apparently people right now are not having that, and they
No.
don't see a good example.
People are talking at each other,
Yeah.
not to each other, and like
Yes.
that's something I've been struggling with. Like you were saying, I have autism before. Like I'm on the spectrum myself, and like I have trouble talking to people because they're not like engaging me. They're just kind of talking at me,
Right.
like giving like simple demands and like small talk and
Waiting for their turn to talk.
yeah.
It
Right.
drives me nuts.
There's not a lot of listening going on, and like I find myself usually doing a lot of that, and half the time I regret it.
Yeah.
It's just like, okay, all right.
But it is a profound skill,
Yeah.
right? Like, the act of listening, like, active listening is extremely profound,
Mhm.
right? And it, like, has helped me. Someone taught me to think that way. And he was on the autistic spectrum. And he's like, but have you ever actively listened to, like, in this case, like, an album?
Mhm.
He's like, have you ever just, like, sat and listened to music, not doing anything else, but just, like,
Mhm.
really listened to it? And that, like, totally
Mhm.
changed my whole world when that, because, like,
Yeah.
all of a sudden, like, the realm of nuance
Mhm.
and the patience that I was able to learn from doing that just made me able to deal with almost anything, you
It's
know?
patience,
Same here,
yeah.
Yeah, right,
Listening is patience. And,
Yeah.
like, you know, you learn a lot from listening.
right.
Unfortunately, I'm a really good listener and people love to tell me things. So I'm
Yes.
just like, I'm very patient just by nature for that. But you learn a lot. I learn a lot about the
Yes.
people around me and, like, you know, people, my coworkers and stuff. I learn a lot by listening. If you don't listen, you can miss a lot of stuff, you know. And again, like, people all express themselves differently. And, you know, through the internet, it really gets muddled. Like, it really gets really weird, you know.
Yeah, like I spend a lot of time listening to records, and like I'll just focus on one instrument and like make my way through the mix, and like each time I hear something different. You know, it's like amazing. Like if you like really, like just actively listen, like you're saying, like you know that could be applied to anything. You know, discourse, like you know, talking to people about like things that are going on. Like if you listen to the perspective, you might learn a thing or two.
Bam.
And
Totally.
that's why I think it's important right now with the issues we're feeling with our culture and all this stuff. I think that what's important is to, part of the communication and fostering that is to provide ways for those people to create more. Because creation, I think, like I said before, it's one of the things we allow not to have, or hopefully not to have, whatchamacallit, not to be censored, right? Because an idea is an idea in art, you know, whatever. So I think that's definitely something we need to invest more in, is supporting DIY scene and music scene and giving people the ability to make art and collaboration, and you know, don't shut someone out because they're not like part of your clique or something. That's the most stupid
Yeah,
thing.
it's
So many people are like, oh, if you're not
of
like,
course,
you know,
yeah.
very selective now, like stop it. Just be like,
But it's also like kind of human nature too.
It is.
You know, like you have your little
Totally.
group and you feel cool.
I think
you
it's
know.
boring.
I think it's very immature to
New
think that
people
way.
are like have a lot to
Me too.
offer, you know.
Exactly.
I'm never opposed to meeting someone new because they could really change everything. They could bring something up.
Yeah, I love immersing myself in the unknown.
I feel like you've been pretty quiet.
Yeah, so sorry.
I've just been listening. I mean,
Yeah,
there's a lot of stuff
actively
that's been
listening.
going around.
This sounds a good active listener.
Yeah.
I think meeting new people is really, really valuable. And a lot of times, like the beliefs that I hold are like very clearly like a synthesis of like people I can name. You know, like a certain belief I would have would be like something that Mare mentioned once, and something that like my mom mentioned once. And between the two of those, I like got an idea that would make sense to me. And operating that kind of way, like listening to what people say and trying to kind of like mix it all together is, I think, really, really helpful. And it goes back to what you were saying before about your personality being the sum of your interactions. And I mean, sociology is a very important point about that, like just what you are is the sum total of your social relations. And the more you can kind of diversify them, the more you have access to new information that's legitimately useful. Because I feel like if you just have the same relation all the time, you exhaust it, kind of, you know. And especially if the other person doesn't really grow much, which does happen.
You stagnate together, and it's
exactly.
useless. Not useless, but like it's, you know, you're not.
It's super weird. It kind of like it crystallizes in a really bad way, and then you just kind of have this echo chamber between the two of you where you're just talking about the same thing that you've always talked about. It's like a dark.
I guess we've all had that experience because we're all like, oh yeah.
Yeah, no, I know people like that. You're like, oh,
Yeah.
you haven't
Right.
branched out at all.
Yeah.
Like, wow.
I thought it was interesting what you said though about how it's important to remember from whence your ideas came.
Yeah.
Wow, cool.
You know, like I just want to like focus on that for a moment because like that really was astounding. Like just to be acutely aware of like where your belief system came from, like where your notions about things, like where the, you know, the origin, because like they don't just come out of a vacuum. You know, like they come from somewhere, and so many of my friends and my peers are reluctant to just meet that idea, that possibility head on, that maybe what they believe didn't just happen out of thin air. You know, they might have learned that somewhere. And to be aware of like where that came from, you know, like,
It's powerful because sometimes I've read a sentence in a book and I sit there, I'm like, wow, this just rocked my world. Like, this is it. And I write it down, and I keep it around, and, like, reading it over and over changes you. Like, it could be just one sentence or something that someone says once, and it really just, like, flips it around for you. It's really, really amazing. So that's a really excellent point.
I think that context can be really helpful in, like, implementing the idea as well. So, like, if you learn something from a certain person and then, like, years go by and that person's in a situation and they've developed a certain way, and you can kind of imagine it as the logical conclusion of that idea, depending on how much it drives that person. Like, if that was like a driving force in their life and they get to a certain place because of that, then you can judge kind of the quality of that idea based on the quality of the situation they're in. Essentially, like, you can do a kind of like person-to-person algebra where if you're the sum total of your social relations and they're the sum total of, et cetera, then you can like think a lot about these ideas and think a lot about how to implement them in your life, which has very, very different relationships than theirs. And that's something I think a lot specifically about when I'm going like between here and Egypt, because like for the vast majority of my life, I felt as though there's kind of like a Egyptian Hassan and like an American Hassan, and over time as I got older, it became more of like a real synthesis of that, where I act more like myself in both places, and the only way to do that was to combine kind of the good from both places as much as I could. And if you don't do that like well, then you end up kind of like splitting your personality in a way that's really difficult to maintain. Like that was especially hard when I was younger, and like my aunts and uncles and stuff would call me, and I almost have to like code switch in a way that's like really, really difficult.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
Wow. I think one of the final points that I'd like to make is like my concern about a lot of the stuff we're talking about today is like I'm someone who's been participating in music for 10 years now, and in my experience, music scenes seem to attract the worst of us. You know, like the worst, meaning like the people who are hurt the most, who do hurt the most, like who hurt others the most, and who are hurt. And I think, you know, the thing I'm scared of the most is that's like music scenes, in my experience, is where these people go to rehabilitate. You know, like, oh, I just had a shitty week, I'm going to go see my favorite band,
That's right, man.
and I'm going to feel good, and I'm going to move on, and I'm going to do this. And now, like, a lot of the culture is making people too afraid to go to these places, you know? And there's no centers, or there's no situations where they can go and do that. Or if there are, they're isolationist, right? Where it's just sort of like, what happens when all the people, like all the kids in music who get called rapists start making bands and they all start hanging out? And then they're all just, you know, acting the same way. You know, like that's not changing them or socializing them in new ways.
Yeah.
That's just making all the people you think are rapists hang out.
Yeah.
Isn't that bad?
Yeah, quite.
Yeah.
You know? So, like, to me, that is, like, one thing that really, like, I was really inspired by the idea of safe space politics when it first came around, because, like, to me, I didn't think America was a safe place to begin with. So the idea to create places where people can come and express themselves and be whoever it is they are for the moment seemed, like, really good to me. But until I realized that what a lot of that culture was about was being able to say whatever you want with anyone talking back to you. You know, which
Like when I first started hearing about that sort of stuff, there was a type of hypocrisy kind of inherent in it. You know, like I heard safe space. It's like, why can't I put on a dress and go into a public bar and start singing? You know, like why do you need to be in a safe place to be yourself? Like, has it really come to that? Like, I felt like
Wow.
It definitely does for some people.
it does. You know, yeah, I agree with that too.
like there's a like I'm not going to question like any of that, you know, but there is a certain fearlessness that has to be present, you know, to speak your minds and to play your instrument, you know.
Right.
Like sure, you know, like there can be like a cushion of comfort, you know, for you to know like, okay, I could do a certain thing and like people won't naysay me.
Right.
But you're going to have to tackle that at some point. You know, because you might play at a safe space or something, but there's other venues. You know?
Like, we're focusing on making making these separate
Yeah.
spaces. I think we should be working to integrate it into society more so. Because what you're saying is you're taking a safe space, which would be a venue to play music at, and dividing it even more as to who can and who can't be here.
Exactly.
So I think we should work on more of making that like, okay, fine, next time everyone's going to come here and we're just going to like make some sort of something to get everyone involved in it.
Yeah.
And then realize, you know, we can get along.
Yeah.
Or it's not scary to be here.
It's
or something.
exclusionary, you know, like
Yeah.
from the get-go, it's like, you know, let's say there's 30 people standing outside the safe space, you know, and like, it's like, okay, the show's about to start, come on in, guys, you know, guys, whatever, and there's probably only be like 5 people in there.
And what happens when you leave?
Yeah, you know, like what happens? It's, there's so many steps that, like, I just kind of saw weren't there.
To me, a truly safe space is a diverse one, right? One that has, and so, like, I do understand the criticism was like, oh, music is just a bunch of white boys. Because, like, it kind of is.
In this area, sure.
Because usually those are the privileged few who have access to the guitars, the amps, the equipment, the friends who have a basement, the funding, right. It's like, so, like, that is true, you know, but that is a more deeper political, philosophical observation than why is it only, you know.
And is that a reason for a safe space? You know, like
I think it calls for a lack of, because like that creates that isolationism that we were talking about. You know, like I even don't like listening to bands anymore because it's like how many times can I hear some guy tell me he messed up in a relationship? I can't take it anymore. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I want to hear like something else. You know, I want to hear about like someone's grandma and how like they changed their life or something. You know?
Yeah.
Or like, you know, anything.
Yeah, just something other than like the tired subject matter that we've been dealing with in pop music for like 75 years.
Yeah. And that's what this goes back to what you were saying, and so that's why it's up to, like I am a white man, and it's like up to people, right? It's up to us to create these platforms for other people to express themselves.
Without curating it, without picking and choosing who can participate.
Okay, right, but sort of, right? Because I ran a basement venue for a while, and I did have to actively choose bands with girls in them after a while. You know, because like someone created a spreadsheet of all the bands that play there, and I just said yes to everyone who asked me. I didn't even curate anything.
Right.
You know, I was like, you want to play? Great. You got a guitar? You're going to play. You suck? Well, hopefully after tonight you won't. You know, because you're going to play with good bands tonight, and you're going to practice, and you're going to want to impress them. But after a while, I realized that, no, I think I actively did have to make a measure to find bands with girls in them to play in my environment.
Yeah.
Right? And that, to me, I was worried that was going to make me, like, sexist or whatever, because then I'm actively choosing them. But the truth is, because I was in a situation of power, that was my duty.
You're trying to be
If anything, you were doing the opposite, trying to make it more diverse. So.
Right.
Because it wasn't organically
becoming that way.
Only because it was situational. It's the area.
Right.
That's the kind of bands we have here.
Right.
So.
Totally.
Yeah.
Anyways.
Right. And that's why I felt hurt when people were saying, well, you know, like, your space is, like, full of white people and, like, all this other stuff. It's like, what? Like, no, that's not what I wanted, you know? Like, that's never what I wanted, you know?
God damn it.
Yeah, but they did make a point. Again. I didn't actively pursue to do that thing, and then it's just
it requires, you know, like, you know, you and I like doing homework and, like, you know, looking at the music, like, studying members, like, getting the information, you know, and then booking a more inclusive show.
Yeah.
But then the other issue I was having is, do I book the band with the abuser in it? You know what I mean? And like, to me, I'm just like, and my stance is because I had a troubling childhood with my parents, right? And one of my parents, I would argue, both my parents were abusive in a certain way, and I think it's important for, you know, these abusive people to find a situation where they have a stable lifestyle, so they're not being unstable and hurting other people.
Yeah.
You know, but then the issue of music is that you're giving someone a platform to express themselves, and
that's the catch.
That's a power. Yeah, that's a power situation.
That's what we were talking about earlier. You know, like how you can use your platform to say whatever you wish.
Right.
You know, so long as you have a live mic on you.
Right.
You know, you could spout nonsense.
Right. But it's like, the question is someone always an abuser? Like, that's the thing that I'm tackling with.
I don't think it's a state of being. I think it's
but for
it's
some
a
people
transgression.
it might be. Maybe. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know the answer.
Me neither.
I think that's how society, especially social media, sees it.
Yeah.
Like, it's kind of, I always relate this to the U.S. prison system, because it's like, you put these people in there, and we deem them...
It's like a scarlet letter kind of thing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like, we just have them fulfill that stereotype. Well, not the stereotype, but the label we give them. So if you're a monster, you're going to fulfill that, because if you're anything else other than that, no one's going to, like, care or take you seriously.
Yeah.
So we never give them a chance to fulfill the role of being a human being that can realize, like, that can change, and, like, you know... So that's how I see it.
Yeah, I have an example.
I'm all for people getting the whole, like, you know, to that extent, like the punishment that I guess they would get possibly from whatever, but at the same time, you gotta, like, you can't just have the fire with no solution. I just don't get the whole, because then then that whole movement just burns out, and it makes everybody look bad in the end. You look crazy, and you have no seriousness left, because you've had nothing to...
So when I say police each other, I guess I say that kind of like I say it kind of broadly, like, you know, if someone is abusing someone and people know it, you have to call them out on it, but try to help them be better. Like that, I think it goes with it, like trying to help people, you know, like stop being that way. You know, I know it's like it's a really big thing to tackle with people. People are so complex and like, you know, but that is also part of your job. That don't just be like, you're a bad person.
Yes.
Don't come to my shows, or like you're not included. You're not allowed to to come to my spaces. But I don't know, like it's really hard to like.
But it
deal
does
with
work.
I think it's the way we do it though.
What? Right. Yes.
Because social media is this big platform with a bunch of strangers that have no idea, and it's another thing to get your group of people that were possibly involved in this situation or know you, and be like, hey, so this happened. We're all friends here. Like, let's figure out how to fix this before
like
you throw it to the wolves, and then it's gone.
Like you said, communication's everything.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like it's so obvious, and people are like, I don't know how to get through this. Like, we should probably just talk about it. Like, it'll really get a lot done. You know,
like,
just discuss it.
To, like, go back to what you're saying, like to answer, like, if you're a venue owner and you're like wondering whether to book the band with the abuser, like, I think what I would do is like figure out who's attending the show. You know, speak to them about this issue. You know, get a consensus going.
Yeah.
Be like, okay, I'm considering having this group play. Like, is there going to be a problem? Like, you think that this is problematic? Like,
for me, I would talk to the other bands playing.
Yeah.
Because I don't know who's going to come to the show.
Yeah, attendance.
But I'll talk to the other bands, because if they're willing to share the stage with the person,
they don't want to look bad.
Right. The people who are like, I'm not really about that, I give them the platform to lead.
Yes.
You know? But I do believe that only by socializing more will they be rehabilitated.
Yeah.
You know, hopefully.
Isolation does nothing.
Right.
It worsens it in most cases.
Right. I have an example of someone who is very interesting to me, because they were claimed to be like a rapist on the internet, and they were called out, and they had definitely done a lot of bad things. A lot. Like many. Like, so much so that when it came out, like hundreds of people,
oh my God,
you know, like were like saying, yeah, I've had a similar experience with someone like that, right? And it's because they were doing it on the internet. Like, they weren't physically doing it with people or whatever. Yeah, right. So, but that person, I don't know if they've stopped their behavior totally, but they've stopped doing it to the degree at which they were doing it before. But until I spoke with them maybe a year or two later, they were isolating themselves with groups of people that were negative in the way that he was negative, right?
They feed on each other.
Right. And it wasn't until, like, I was someone who wasn't really part of that, and I was just like, no, you gotta, no, just no. Like, don't do all those things. Like, I luckily was able to be a voice for him of an alternative narrative other than the narrative that everyone was making him believe about himself.
Yeah.
And, like, that's one thing, it's like, that's where labels become so scary, you know, because if you really are hurt, you'll believe anything. And then when you're hurt and you believe something about yourself, you become that, you know, as opposed to trying to change that.
Prophecy.
Bam.
Yeah.
Right. So I do think everything comes down to creating rehabilitation centers and being people who are strong enough to be around people who hurt and cause hurt.
Yeah, I think it's also important to broaden your social thing, because
right, and you said
know,
that before, which I totally agree with that.
Like, I'm such a, like, I don't know, like, I feel like I have such small groups that I interact with, but I never want to be, like, part of this huge big scene, and, like, because I like to have the intimate relations with my friends, you know, and I feel like, for instance, someone like that, coming into this experience, because I've met them too, I feel like I know nothing about them except who they are right now, and I think they're a great person. So I think more people need to meet more people out there, because they'll find that not everybody hates them, and they
Yeah.
will have support there.
I've met some like
You know?
some people who people think are like total dirtbags, you know, and I've had like conversation with them, and they're the nicest people in the world. They're really sweet, you know, and it's like, I mean, I don't ever like ask myself like, oh, why do they get called this sort of stuff? Like, why are they ousted in this way? I'm just like, in the moment, I'm just like, wow, this person is really nice, you know, like. I don't know what will happen eventually. For that, I'm unsure. You know, I can't make that call. But in this moment, like, this person is a sweetheart.
Right.
You know, and, like, there's no reason why they shouldn't be given the help they need.
Yeah, well, in some cases, people are very good at being manipulative.
Of course.
That's the thing. That's what got them in the situations that they're in. But the other thing is also, it's like, there is no... So, like, a lot of this is still stems, I think, from sexual politics. There is no positive role model for women in Western society. Every role model is gaining power through being a subordinate to something for someone else, right? Which is bad. So that's why I see that the fact that, like, these situations are an easy way to attain power, which is clearly necessary at our time. And we need to find positive female role models, right? Who are strong and independent, in my view, right? For other people, you know.
Nurture culture.
Right, exactly.
That's
so
how we're gonna fix rape culture.
Right, exactly.
Is make everybody a mom, you know, moms all around.
I can't agree anymore. Really.
Yeah,
I
really.
so strongly. Because I'm the kind of person, like, I really, like, you know, I really feel for everyone, unfortunately.
Right.
No,
totally,
it's a
unfortunately.
curse, but, like, it's
So
also
right.
a power, really. I really feel for everyone.
Right.
Like, you know, my parents, like, you play devil's advocate. I'm like, you have to. Everyone's multifaceted. Like, you don't know, like, every villain has a backstory. You know what I mean? Like,
I think a lot of the depravity of man comes from the lack of a woman, like a mother figure. And not to get all Freudian on this, but I really do think so.
Well, no, okay, so I do believe that oftentimes men who become psychopathic or are psychopathic do not have a nurturing character, who is usually the mother in this case. But it also happens when the nurturing character who is the mother is the abusive one, right? And that's when males turn into psychopaths usually. In my experience of meeting people like that.
Yeah.
So, but nurture.
Yeah, nurture
everyone.
culture. Let's start that.
Yeah.
Let's just
Yeah.
start doing that because
that's the
like
direction.
I'm just tired of the status quo.
Bam.
It is upsetting me because
You hear that, world?
yeah, come on.
Nurture culture.
Fuck the status quo.
Be someone's mom.
Yeah,
Be
seriously.
everybody's mom.
Be everyone's mom.
Just be kind
Be
and
your own
empathetic.
mom.
Like just give someone a hug or something.
Yes.
Totally,
One
yeah.
hugs.
You know, just something.
Yes.
Just something. Whatever you feel comfortable doing, just do something.
Wow. I can't believe we went through this so organically.
Yeah,
I wrote these randomly too, and I don't know how we just
I
were able
predicted
to.
it. I knew. I was going to happen.
Beautiful.
organically. I knew it.
Nice. You want to say a closing statement? I guess.
Oh
It's
yeah,
9
we're gonna
o'clock, right?
start finishing up. So, well, I want to hear their closing statement because I'm.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. So.
Wow, we all have closing statements.
Sure,
Closing
yeah.
statements or any inspiring things you just want to tell the world about? I don't know.
Cool.
Just keep on pursuing rock and roll, and don't stop because if you stop, the man wins.
Ooh.
Great message, yo.
Truthism.
Yep.
Wow, this was really cool. This was. I feel like talks like this are so important, like more important than anyone gives them credit for at all. Like even if one person watches this, Lex, important. Like really opening,
Shout out to Lex.
opening doors to new ideas and things of that nature. Like everyone needs to talk about stuff. I come from a family, luckily, where everyone's pretty open. I'm so annoying. I really bully my family with like truth. I'm like, let's talk about this. Like I don't want to. Everyone needs to talk about it. Like everyone needs to talk about everything. Nurture culture. This is the beginning of it. It's just talking.
Totally.
It's being open about things. So this was really cool. I'm really glad I came.
Thanks. Awesome.
Yeah, despite our screen over here, we actually had, about 5 or 6 viewers at once.
I'm so
almost
near
the
that
whole
I
time.
can't see, but that's
Yeah.
amazing. That's great.
So
Thank
we
you,
did have a group of
everybody.
people watching, so that was good.
Excellent.
Yeah, basically the same thing. Like, it's been really cool, and it's always good to like get people exposure to new ideas. Everyone like get involved in discussion. Same kind of thing we were talking about before, where like getting diverse social relations is really important. It's kind of what we're doing right now in practice.
True.
And like getting a better understanding of things together by like going back and forth and like performing a better synthesis of the ideas is something that's really, really helpful. So glad to be here. It was fun.
Cool.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess mostly I learned this from someone who really inspired me when I was younger, is really try to be everyone's mom, like really.
On it.
Yeah, like so
Everybody
much of
said
Western culture is about, being tough and enduring.
Machismo.
Yeah, but it's like, that just makes you kind of dumb. In my experience where I've done that and tried to endure instead of communicating, and, that's where I failed
There's no
almost every
weakness
time.
in that.
Yeah,
And
right.
that's what seems to be the perpetuated,
Right.
that there's weakness in wanting to, talk or something, or have feelings. Apparently having feelings is weak. I don't know.
Empathy is not weakness.
I think
Right.
having feelings
Strength.
is tiring, and it's strength.
Yeah,
so
really, it's
you
your
learn
strength.
to
Thanks a lot,
feelings.
James Dean.
Yeah.
So thank you to everybody that came tonight. Thank you people for watching. I hope everyone feels a little bit full and satisfied, like I just ate a 5-course meal from that. My brain
I
like,
feel
"Wah!"
good. Feeling good.
So awesome. And I will definitely be posting information about the next session tomorrow, I guess. So yeah, thanks.
Cheers.